Hello everyone, thank you for coming, and welcome to today's LIDNUG event in association with WIntelect. And I'm proud to bring to you today Tony Sneed for getting visual code ready for TypeScript. A few housekeeping chores to start with. First, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Orgsweb, Telerik, Inner Workings, Syncfusion, Pluralsight, and of course WIntelect now. For without you guys, we can't do what we do. You can find and contact LIDNUG through various places such as the email at info@lidnug.org, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, where this video will be uploaded. You will also find our back catalogue, and of course LinkedIn. Tony Sneed is a consultant at WIntelect. This is his first LIDNUG presentation and has a vast amount of experience with .NET. He's a mentor to many and an all-round good guy. If you want to know more about Tony, you can find him on his blog at tonysneed.com. For questions, the live system allows one question per person at a time, and will take Tony's lead on when he wants to break for answers and questions you may have. If you need assistance or would like us to ask anything not related to Tony's presentation, you can find LIDNUG staff in the attendees list by looking for those with LIDNUG next to their name. And finally, attendee geography is very nicely spaced out across the world. So from there, Tony, I'll give the internet to you.
All right, thank you, Gavin, for that great introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we should be able to then get started. Right. Okay, everyone should see my initial slide here on the presentation that I'll be giving right now called Getting Visual Studio Code Ready for TypeScript. My name is Anthony Sneed. I work as a consultant and instructor for WIntelect, as well as independently. There's my Twitter handle at Tony Sneed on the first slide, as well as my email address, tony.sneed@icloud.com. Looks like there's an I missing in that address, but we'll just find it on another slide as well. Just a little bit about myself here. I'm married with 3 children. I come from Los Angeles, moved to Dallas, but I'm currently residing in Europe in a country called Slovakia, where I hang out and speak at various conferences. I've got about 20 years experience in software development, half of which has been spent in the world of .NET. So I come from a classic C# development background, and I'm making the shift now, and I've been doing that for some time, toward JavaScript, TypeScript, and the whole world of web development. Lots of good reasons for that. I also have a couple of open source projects that I'm proud of. One is called Trackable Entities, which enables change tracking across service boundaries. I've had that for a number of years, probably about 5 years now, and it enables end-tier support for entity framework, essentially, and it comes with Visual Studio extensions and NuGet packages and the whole bit, basically, to make you productive. I also have a toolkit called Simple MVVM Toolkit, which I just ported to .NET Core. So I'm active all in those places. This is some of my contact information. There's my email address, correctly written, tony.sneed@icloud.com. You can also reach me via posting a comment on my blog, which is blog.tonysneed.com. I'm also available at all these social media. The one I'm most active on is Twitter, and my handle there is @TonySneed. So feel free to reach out to me at any time through any of those means if you have any questions about what we've covered here today. Presentation. I've posted it up on GitHub. I happen to have a GitHub account, so it's github.com/TonySneed. And the slides are available up there. There's a repository called WIntelect.vscode TypeScript, where you can get the slide PDFs. And the code that I'll be demonstrating here is in another repository called demo.vscode.typescript. And you can get both of those online. In addition, I have my own Yeoman generator, and I'll be explaining in a little bit what Yeoman is and why you might care about it. But it's also a productivity tool for enabling TypeScript development with a tool like Visual Studio Code. And it's called Generator Tony Sneed VS Code TypeScript. So all of that information is there for you online. I'm going to switch over to the browser here and just highlight a couple of things. Here's my blog. One thing I'd like to point out on my blog is I have a series of blog posts on getting Visual Studio Code ready for TypeScript. The first part is compiling TypeScript to JavaScript. Then I've got information here in the second part on writing Jasmine tests in TypeScript. I've also got, if we go to my main blog, a third post in this series, which I didn't update the other two posts on, which I'll do. And the third third part is using Gulp. So if anything that I share with you today piques your interest and you want to dig deeper, feel free to visit my blog and read those 3 blog posts. Here's the GitHub repository where you can find the slides right there. So you can check out the slides for this presentation. The other repository here is this demo repository with the code in it. So I'll just go ahead and search for that. Demo.vscode.typescript. All right, so this has all the goodness here of all the things I'm going to be showing you. You can check that out. And there it is again. I guess I had it open already. Here is the homepage for TypeScript. It's typescriptlang.org. Here is the homepage for Visual Studio Code. So you can download Visual Studio Code from this web page. It's code.visualstudio.com. Right? And I'll be pointing some of that out later on as we dive into the presentation. Okay, so these are our objectives. We're going to talk about a little bit of background to begin with to make sure we're all on the same page. Going forward, we're just going to briefly define what we mean by TypeScript. What is this thing we call TypeScript? What's a good understanding of what TypeScript is? And then, what is Visual Studio Code? This talk is about getting Visual Studio Code ready for TypeScript, meaning, this is really kind of a sweet spot when you develop JavaScript applications in TypeScript. Visual Studio Code is a great tool to use. It's not the only tool. I'll be talking about some others as well. It happens to be my favorite tool, however, and you can see, I'll talk about some of the advantages that it brings. So we'll talk about that. What I'd like to do in terms of Q&A before I get too much further is let you know that I'll take questions at the end of the talk. We're going to try to go for about an hour here, maybe a little bit more depending on how the time goes, and then we'll have about 15, 20 minutes at the end, depending on how many questions we have. I can entertain questions at the end. So during the presentation, feel free to make notes of things you'd like to ask, and at the end when we have Q&A, you can ask those questions right through the live meeting interface. So after we talk about a brief introduction, defining some terms, TypeScript, Visual Studio Code, we're then going to talk about some of the additional tools you're going to want to use with Visual Studio Code to develop TypeScript applications. And this is where we get into the whole world of Node, Node Package Manager, which we call NPM. We'll talk about a task runner called Gulp, right? And go about how do we go about using Gulp for running tasks? Why would we want to use Gulp? I'll try to make it less scary for you, hopefully. And then we'll look at something called Yeoman, which is a great tool for scaffolding projects. If you're coming from classic C# with Visual Studio, or maybe you're a Java developer using Eclipse, or you're used to a full-fledged IDE, it can be a bit of a shock to come to this simpler world of TypeScript development, where you're essentially using a code editor. And so we're going to use Yeoman to be able to create new projects and bring into our project initially a lot of the code that we're going to need and a lot of the artifacts. So we'll talk about those tools, and then we'll get down and dirty here and talk about actually developing TypeScript applications using Visual Studio Code, what you have to do to enable Intellisense, right, in Visual Studio Code for TypeScript and JavaScript projects. How do you go about compiling, or sometimes the word transpiling is used for converting TypeScript to JavaScript. How do we go about doing that? How do we perform debugging tasks? How do we do linting? And then if we have time, we may not have much time at the end, but we'll touch on the aspect of testing. And even if we don't have time to demonstrate a lot of it, I've got resources, I've got my blog posts and the sample code, which you can use as well to get further into this. We'll try to get into it as much as we can, time permitting. When it comes to testing, we're going to be looking at additional frameworks, and one that I like to use is called Jasmine. It's sort of an all-in-one package, which includes support for mocking and spies, as well as asserts and things of that sort. It's all in one thing, so I like to use Jasmine. Karma is what you use to then run your Jasmine tests. Jasmine is what you're going to write your test in. Then you use Karma to run the test, and typically you want to do that for continuous integration environments, right? We're going to use what's called a headless browser called Phantom.js, and then this integration, you're talking about automated builds, and there's a framework or a tool called Travis CI. It's very similar to, if you're used to using other kinds of build tools, right? And this one happens to be free. It has great integration with GitHub. All right, so there's a lot to cover. Let's proceed. Here's a little bit of background. First of all, let's define what we mean by TypeScript. Well, first of all, TypeScript is JavaScript, right, in a sense, right? It is what we call a superset of JavaScript. So everything that is in JavaScript, and by that we mean, ECMAScript 3, 5, 6, 7, etc. They're changing the nomenclature a little bit. ECMAScript 2015, 2016, all of that is included in TypeScript. Right, this is a very, very important concept to get. Learning TypeScript is not learning some completely separate language that's different from TypeScript. And this is what distinguishes TypeScript from other kinds of languages like CoffeeScript, which are not TypeScript, which are not JavaScript, but which are compiled into JavaScript. TypeScript is compiled into JavaScript, but it starts out as JavaScript. You can take any JavaScript file, simply change the file extension from JS, for example, to TS, and it's valid TypeScript. Okay? And so we like this. This is sort of the difference and what makes TypeScript a rather compelling story, right? And so now that we have ECMAScript 2015, we have in the JavaScript language all of the goodness, or much of the goodness, that we classic object-oriented developers are used to. Things like classes and namespaces and modules, right? TypeScript, in addition to that, brings in another concept called interfaces. You get that with that. That's a TypeScript feature that's not currently in ECMAScript 2015. But there's all these things, as well as future versions of ECMAScript. So, for example, support for async await, right? Decorators and things of that sort, things that are not in the current version of JavaScript, things that will come in the future. Those are also supported in TypeScript, and you can use those today. So we love that. So I'd like to kind of point out the overlap between JavaScript and TypeScript, right? And because some people feel strongly that they're just going to use pure JavaScript, and if you're using TypeScript, you're pretty close to using pure JavaScript. The only thing that's in addition is interfaces. But what makes TypeScript different is the fact that we have the ability to annotate, provide static typing, and this gives us the ability to perform compile time error checking. Right, to catch some of those errors ahead of time. We get type safety, we get Intellisense, and we also get code refactoring. right? So it's essentially what we get with static typing is greater tooling support, right? This is where tools like Visual Studio proper, as well as Visual Studio 2015, or even other code editing tools like Sublime Text or Brackets or Atom or any of these others through the TypeScript language service, they can also provide all of these services, because what we're doing is we're annotating types in JavaScript. So when we do this, we're kind of getting away from a little bit from the dynamic nature of JavaScript. Now, there's nothing that mandates static typing. You can use it as much or as little as you want to. That's the other beauty of TypeScript. It's not an all or nothing proposition, right? And so it's a dial. You can dial it up. So you can not use static typing at all and code away, and you can use all these features of TypeScript, including interfaces, as well as all the other features that overlap with JavaScript, and to your heart's content, and there's no problem. And then you can introduce static typing where you want to. The big motivation, of course, for this whole thing is very large JavaScript code bases. You may have heard this if you know anything about TypeScript. It was really kind of invented to support large JavaScript code bases, because once you get to a certain size, it becomes very difficult to do things like code refactoring or renaming things, right? You don't have the safety that's there. So the tooling can do a lot more for you. So that's TypeScript. Visual Studio Code. This is a brand new development tool from Microsoft, hence the name Visual Studio. That's part of it. Now, don't let it throw you off, because it has absolutely nothing to do, well, almost nothing to do with classic Visual Studio, right, with a full-fledged beast of Visual Studio 2015. This is what we call a code editor, right? So it's much more akin to tools that you may have already used for JavaScript development, or you may have heard about, such as Sublime Text, Brackets, Atom, basically code editors, right, which really don't have all the bells and whistles of a full-fledged IDE, right? Now, what distinguishes Visual Studio from code, from full-fledged Visual Studio, is that it's folder-based versus project-based. Now, it's kind of interesting, because full-fledged Visual Studio is kind of moving in this direction. And the next version of Visual Studio, and even the current one, with the updates, supports this same approach that we find in Visual Studio Code, which means instead of having a project file, like a csproj file or an xproj file, I simply have a folder. And what I do with Visual Studio Code is I just point it to a folder, and that's my project. So my project is everything in the folder, right? In other words, I don't have to list all of my files in some other file, okay? It's simply folder-based. What I get with Visual Studio Code is all the goodness that I'm used to in terms of syntax highlighting, code completion. There's also support for task running, and we get that in full-fledged Visual Studio as well. This becomes very important for our world of TypeScript and JavaScript development. You get also debugging. Another nice feature is you get Git integration for source code control. So that's baked in. It's somewhat limited, but it has the general tasks that allow you to get most of your work done, right? As you're writing code, there's certain Git tasks you're going to want to do, and you can do those right from within Visual Studio Code. And lastly, it includes some extensions. And extensions are sort of the secret weapon of Visual Studio Code. You've got extensions for example, for linking your code, right? So when it comes time to, when you want to type, as you're typing your code, you want to see if you've left out a comma, or you put an extra one in, you've done something that is not according to the standards of writing good JavaScript or good TypeScript. Those are available as extensions. All right, so you get a lot of bang for the buck of Visual Studio Code. It is version 1.1, I think, currently, if I'm not mistaken. It was released, 1.0 was released not too long ago. So what we love about Visual Studio Code is that it's lightweight. It runs on basic hardware. It is not a memory hog, right? And every time I try to do something new in full-fledged Visual Studio, like mobile development, it's going to chew up an extra, 20 or 30 gigabytes of hard disk space. It's going to tax all the RAM that I have available in my system, and it's going to be a problem. What I love about Visual Studio Code and code editors like it is that it's lightweight, right? Secondly, and this is a really big selling point for me personally, it's cross-platform, which means I don't have to develop on Windows. I can develop on my Mac if I want to. And that's what I'm currently doing. I have a Mac, I'm running Windows in a virtual machine, and I do most of my development on the Mac using Visual Studio Code. And I don't even have to fire up a virtual machine. It's a lot more fun for me. Okay. And lastly, or thirdly, it's open source. So Visual Studio Code itself is open source, and it's hosted on GitHub. You can issue pull requests, open issues if there's things you don't like about Visual Studio Code. There's also chat rooms on Gitter, which allow you to ask questions about it. I mean, it's all up there on open source. And as I mentioned, it's extensible. There's a whole extensions gallery for it. Okay. Okay, so that's the story behind Visual Studio Code. Why not Visual Studio 2015? Well, I mentioned it's Windows only. That's one of the things. I can't run Visual Studio 2015 on my Mac. It has to be native or virtual machine. It tends to be a resource hog. Time and space and everything. And if you start developing TypeScript using full-fledged Visual Studio 2015, it really doesn't buy you that much. There's still a lot that you have to do. Right? So you don't get these elaborate, project templates, that you would get for other kinds of applications like WPF or something, right? But for TypeScript, it's pretty plain vanilla, so there's not really a whole lot of reason to use real, full-fledged Visual Studio. Visual Studio Code is a much more compelling option, I think. All right. So, but what's missing from Visual Studio Code that we have or maybe are used to in a full-fledged IDE? The main thing is there's no file new project command, right? So from within the IDE, there's nothing that allows you to create a new project and get all the files that you need. So starting from scratch can be, at first, appear somewhat daunting. And so to make up for that, we're going to use another tool called Yeoman, right? And I'm a big fan of Yeoman. It's based on NPM and Node Package Manager, and it's a generator. And there's all kinds of generators that are already created by the community that live out there. There's also ones created by Microsoft. For example, if you're doing Visual Studio Code for ASP.NET development, ASP.NET Core, there's a Yeoman generator that gives you all kinds of projects, just like in Visual Studio, right? So I'm going to show you an example of that. You can also roll your own. So you may have your own style of project that you like, and you can customize it. You can take someone else's, like mine, for example, customize it, and all of that, okay? And use Yeoman. So that's the other thing. That's the way we sort of make up for the limitation of a code editor, is by using the Yeoman code generator, right? So basically, we have to also look at some other tools. If you're going to be doing any kind of development for TypeScript with Visual Studio Code, you're going to want to install Node, right? So a lot of the tools, including Yeoman and TypeScript itself, are implemented as Node packages. So the first thing you have to do is install Node. Now, if you don't know what Node.js is, it's a JavaScript runtime. It's built on Chrome's V8 JavaScript engine. It's very fast. It's event-driven, non-blocking, right? I/O, right? So Node is this high-performance, server, HTTP listener, and it's used in a lot of different places. You can use Node, for example, with a framework called Express to create RESTful services. That's the typical use of Node. But it's not the only use. You also use it for other things like running tests, running scripts, running any kind of JavaScript. Right? It doesn't have to be on the server. It can be in your development environment as well. With Node, you get this thing we call NPM, right? The Node Package Manager. You can install packages globally, for example. So one thing we'll do right off the bat is we'll install TypeScript as a global NPM package, right? Another thing we might want to install globally is Gulp, right, to run tasks, right? Those kinds of things. To install package locally in your project. And all of that's managed by a JSON file called package.json. right? And so once you can install packages from the command line, they'll be recorded in the package.json file so that they can then be downloaded again or restored, right? Without having you to, commit all of your packages, all your NPM packages to source code control, right? So the idea is you just have in your source code control package.json, and then you use NPM to restore your dependencies, right? And there's packages for everything, including TypeScript, right? So the other tool that we have besides Node is Gulp. And I'll mention Gulp because if you're going to do any kind of serious JavaScript or TypeScript development, Gulp will make your life a whole lot easier. Now that said, there is a learning curve to Gulp. It's kind of a bit of a steep learning curve. But the payoff is that you can automate these tasks. So it's similar to other kinds of task runners. Another one you might have heard of is Grunt. Grunt is based more on configuration files. Gulp is based on streams. It's written in JavaScript. So as a JavaScript developer, a lot of us are more familiar or more comfortable with Gulp, and we prefer that. So I'm a big fan of Gulp. There's lots of good courses on the internet for that, including ones at Pluralsight and WIntelect. So you can check out Gulp. Essentially what you do is you put it all in a Gulp file. You define your tasks there in JavaScript, and then you can run those tasks. Right? And so, okay, and there's numerous plugins for Gulp. We're doing all kinds of things. And what makes Gulp, I think, compelling is that it allows you to chain tasks together. Right? So you can do things without Gulp. You can just use Node directly. No problem, or NPM. And execute tasks, or execute scripts rather. But what makes this compelling is that you can chain Gulp tasks together. So for example, maybe before you want to compile, you want to perform a linting task. Right? And maybe before you compile, you want to clear out and delete existing compiled files, compiled JavaScript files. The other thing you might want to do is you can do bundling, minification. You can inject scripts. There's many things you can do, and you can organize these together very nicely with Gulp. So I really like it. But the sort of the sweet spot for Gulp with regard to Visual Studio Code is that VS Code recognizes Gulp tasks automatically. All you have to do is add the Gulp file to your project, to your folder, and Visual Studio Code picks it right up and recognizes those as tasks, and you can execute Gulp tasks right from within Visual Studio Code. All right, so that's pretty compelling, right? And so here's some examples of things you can do. Transpiling TypeScript, that's the first thing we're going to look at next. Validating code quality with linting. You can also run tests through Gulp and do some of these other build steps that we talked about. All right, so those are Gulps. So that's sort of the lay of the land. We talked about TypeScript in general, Visual Studio Code, some of the plugins, the first thing you're going to want to do is to create some TypeScript. Let's write some TypeScript. We're going to write it from scratch, and then we're going to transpile it from TypeScript to plain old JavaScript. And this is similar to other transpiling tools like Babel, where you want to end up with a form of TypeScript which is going to be compatible across most browsers. And currently that would be ECMAScript 5, right? And as browsers add support for ECMAScript 6 or 2015, you can compile to that if you want to. And so the first thing we need to do is install Node.js, right? You can go to the nodejs.org website, run the installer, and install it on your machine. Then you're going to want to install TypeScript. And you can do that with npm install with the global flag. Right, and after you've done that, you're going to initialize the project with npm. That will give you your package.json file. The Y flag will simply, is a little faster. It responds yes to all the prompts, right, with some default values. So I tend to do that because I'm a little bit lazy. After you do that, you can create a new folder. You can put a TypeScript file in there. You can create a class with a constructor, a method, etc., and then you can go ahead and then compile it. And so the tool that we can use to compile this is something called TSC rather. And as soon as you do that, it'll go ahead and compile it to JavaScript, and then you can run that JavaScript using Node. Okay, so that's what we want to do. Let's go ahead and do that. And to do that, I'm going to grab some TypeScript code here. And here I've got a code in the slide. I'll just copy and paste it out. I've got a class that I'm creating. And again, classes are part of ECMAScript 2015. So this is not really even TypeScript specific. This is just plain old JavaScript. I'm creating an instance of that. I'm calling the constructor here, right? Passing in a message, and then I'm going to go ahead and invoke a method on that returns a string. Now, what makes this TypeScript are these type annotations here, right? So I'm specifying here that the parameter to my constructor needs to be of a string type. And when I do that, then I get Intellisense, compile time, type checking, and the tools are going to help you more there. And it's also going to help with refactoring and things like that if I want to rename things or move them around. Similarly, the greet method here is going to return a string. Right, and I can do all kinds of things here, and then I'm just going to print out the greeting to the log, right? So I'll go ahead and grab this code. I'm going to copy it, and we're going to go to a folder that I created called my temp directory, just called hello ts, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new file, just a plain old text file, and I'm going to call it greeter.js. And we're going to go ahead and open that up with a text editor. And let me just do that, and I'm going to paste my code in there. Okay, like so, right? Now, I said this is JavaScript, so I'm going to remove the type annotations, and this should then be valid JavaScript, like so, right? And I should be able to open this up in Visual Studio Code and do some things. But this should be valid. This should be valid JavaScript as well as valid TypeScript. So let's go ahead and try to just maybe run that. Okay. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to open up a command prompt. And I've already installed Node and NPM and TypeScript, so I don't have to do that. So let's see if I went ahead and ran this this guy here. I'm going to say what did I call this? Greeter.js. Right? And you notice I got an error. So let me go back and fix that, which I think I had here. Now, here I'm using Notepad, which is, crazy, right? And here, yeah, it doesn't have, I'm just going to put in the message. Yeah, see if that's happier there. Yeah, there it is. Hello, undefined. Okay, so it's giving me back a greeting, and because I've got some code in there. As you can see, I'm already having some problems, right? And I could use some help from a tool like TypeScript at this point. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and replace this, rename this TS, and I'm going to go ahead and open this up in Visual Studio Code. So when you install Visual Studio Code, in Windows, it's by default, and then on Mac you can easily configure this. You can have a little context menu, and on there's a nice command that says open with code. All right, so I just point that to a folder or a file, and I'm going to open that using Visual Studio Code. So here I've got my greeter class, right? And I've got my TypeScript. And we can see already which, yeah, that's right, because I did some things here. So basically, in the constructor, I might want to have, another, a field called message, for example, right? So you can see I already made, I made some mistakes, and I would correct that perhaps, for example, if I wanted to do that. But that's why I'm getting back the undefined here, right? Because I'm passing in a message here, and then I'm returning something, but it hasn't been defined, right? This message variable is just local to greet. So you can see I'm doing some things which, I could use a little bit of help in, and that's where TypeScript is gonna help me. Right? So first of all, let's go ahead, but I wanted to sort of point out the fact that this is simply plain old JavaScript, and it's valid TypeScript, right? But what gives me some extra goodness here is the fact that I can now use type annotations, right? So I'm going to say that, coming in here, I want my parameter to be a string. There's a nice thing that I can do by declaring this public. I'm going to get a public property on my greeter class called message, and therefore this .message works now. And I can even say that I want to return a string, for example, right? So now I've sort of benefited from TypeScript in the sense that I can now use static typing here, and the tools can help me and point out errors. Let's go ahead and compile this. Now we can do it from the command line if we want to. And the way we're going to do that is using this tool called TSE. So I could do that. So TSE, and I'm going to compile this greeter .ts, right? And as soon as I do that, I now have this transpiled into JavaScript. So one of the things you can do in Visual Studio Code is you can open them side by side. So there's a little open to the side command, and I can see both at the same time. I can see the TypeScript on the left, and I can see what the TypeScript compiler has produced on the right. And on the right we see, standard ECMAScript 6 or ECMAScript 5 JavaScript, right? And so this is what you get here just from the command line, right? So it's you can do this, but what we're really interested in here is using Visual Studio Code for a lot of this stuff. And so so this is where I want to get maybe a little bit fancier. So let's go back to the slides and show you how to do that. Right. Let me go to another slide. All right, so now we want to get into development using Visual Studio Code and TypeScript. Now, as it turns out, doing simple things like I just showed you, that's kind of the hello world, right? But when it comes down to actually, using Visual Studio Code to do real TypeScript development, there's a lot more involved, right? So one of the things we'll talk about is Intellisense. So, and what I talk about this is because TypeScript uses type definition files, and Visual Studio Code picks that up and provides Intellisense. And what's interesting about this is that it's not just Intellisense for TypeScript files, but it's Intellisense for JavaScript files as well. So all the primitive types, the DOM, they're already included, the type definitions for those. So that's turned on by default. If you're using any other JavaScript libraries, also jQuery is included by default. Using some others, though, say maybe you want to do some Gulp plugin, or you want to do some other kind of JavaScript library, you can find their type definitions created for many different JavaScript libraries. Those are on a site called Definitely Typed, and there's a tool called Typings, which allows you to generate type definitions for not just for your code, but also for these third-party libraries. Right? So you install Typings globally here using npm, right? And then you use Typings to install specific, type definitions for specific libraries. So, for example, for Node, I can install those Typings, and that will then give me Intellisense. Right? The other thing, though, that I want to point out before I look at that more closely is that and if you want to give hints or instructions or parameters to the TypeScript compiler, you can do that through a file called tsconfig.json. And where you place this in your project will define the root of your TypeScript project, right? And this will be picked up by the TypeScript compiler. So, and what's cool about this in Visual Studio Code is that you get Intellisense for this file. Right, so it allows you to define these things. So, for example, So there's support for module loading. You can determine the flavor of TypeScript you want to use, source maps for debugging. If you want a declaration, it means you want to produce type definitions for your classes, and all kinds of other things as well. Right. So this is what you can do. Once you have that file defined, you can then go ahead and use the TSC compiler to compile, right? And what you could do at this point is you could then define a task within Visual Studio Code that runs the TypeScript compiler, right? And this is a lot of times what you see on the websites and the blog posts for compiling TypeScript. What's interesting about this is then it then lets you use a keyboard shortcut, Command-Shift-B, for example. And you can change those bindings if you want to. You can use that shortcut to just compile your code automatically. All right, so we can get into all of that, and so the first time you try to build, you're going to be prompted, and it'll create for you this file. Now I'm not going to demo it because we're going to sort of move beyond the hello world scenario, and we're going to talk a little bit more about real world, and for that we're going to need to use Gulp. Okay, so I'm going to just move in that direction. And so in your project file, your package.json file, you can define a script section, and you can define scripts to do tasks, right? So for example, you want to install type definitions, you want to compile, you want to run some tests. You can do that from within the scripts section of your package.json, and you can just run it from the command line using npm. But that's kind of limiting, as I mentioned. You're going to get much bang for the buck by embracing Gulp and using Gulp, right? Add a gulpfile.js to the project. That will allow you to use Gulp, right? And so you can install Gulp locally and then run Gulp tasks from the command line, right? And so this is a nice example of the kind of thing you would find in your Gulp task. And in this Gulp task, it's called compile. I'm actually removing a directory called distribution where I want to copy my compiled code, and then I'm going to execute the TypeScript compiler directly here. Right? So this is kind of how you want to do it. But you're going to define it as a Gulp task because then you can chain this together with other tasks, and you can get kind of more sophisticated. Right? And then you're going to run Gulp from the command line. Right? Like so, right? So that's basically Gulp, and then when you kind of tie the two together, you can actually then have define a task.json file in Visual Studio that are going to run your Gulp commands, right? And so what you do is you define this task so that when you press Control-Shift-B, it's going to run the Gulp task and compile. Okay? And that's kind of what we like. We want to use Visual Studio together with Gulp. That's the idea, right? And right. The other thing you can do here that I'll mention is debugging. So if you're in Visual Studio Code, you press F5. It's going to prompt you to create a launch.json file, and you create a configuration, and you can debug, right? And so, for example, you can debug the current file, etc. Right? Right. So that's part of what you can do there. And okay, so then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and take you through some of these tasks, right? And so so one thing I'll do is go ahead and take you through a little bit of the tasks here. So here, this is a compile and debugging demo. I'm going to actually move to this slide right here. And these are the steps we can do to be able to, to do this kind of thing. So we can install typings, we can add a tsconfig file, etc. Right? So let's back up just a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and create a new directory, and I'll just call this VS Code -ts. Right? And I'm going to go ahead and go to this directory. The command prompt, and I'm going to go ahead and get started on just creating a project from scratch here. Okay, and to do that, I'm going to execute npm init, And I'm going to give it the Y flag so I don't have to respond to all the prompts. Right? And this will basically set up the project for me from scratch. And then I can open it up in Visual Studio Code. The other thing you can do with Visual Studio Code is you can execute it from the command line. So there you can see my package.json file printed out with some basic information. There you go. And I can type code and hit dot for the current directory. And that's another way of opening up Visual Studio Code. So I can open it from, the File Explorer, or I can open it from the terminal, the command window. And that's pretty good. We tend to be using these two tools together, so a lot of times it's kind of good to have them side by side, or something like that. Right? So this is my package.json file, and you can see it's pretty straightforward there. Let's go ahead and place our class in there. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my greeter class and just create a new file called greeter.ts, and I'll just paste into that everything that I need here, right? So, and as you can see, it's kind of pasted in however it wants to. I can format the code if I want to, right? Just kind of nice, and break this up, put it on different lines. Okay, so there's my greeter class, like so. Let's go ahead and put in our TypeScript definition file. That's called tsconfig.json. So let's add that. Okay. And if I just start typing JSON, I'm going to get Intellisense. Now there's a schema that's it recognizes, so I can press Control spacebar. That's a nice little shortcut for bringing on Intellisense in Visual Studio Code. So the thing that I'm going to need here are compiler options, right? And you can see all I have to do is select the entry, and it does it for me. I can hit Control space again, and now I can select all the options that I want to specify for the compiler. So for example, I want to include as a module common.js, right? And then I want to then bring in my target. And we'll just say ES5. And next is going to be, let's say I want to do source maps, because I'm going to want to do some debugging. And source maps are going to be required in order to debug with TypeScript. And let's say I go ahead and generate some type definitions with a declaration. Okay. And what else? I like doing this no implicit any. That makes it a little bit more strict, and I kind of like that. And then there's two more that I like to do. One is root directory, and we'll make that the current directory. And finally, there's something called out directory. So what I like to do is specify a distribution folder, and I'll just call it dist, something like that. Okay, so these are my compiler options that I've defined, and that's generally what you're going to want to do. Then I want to compile using this, right? So if I, for example, press Control-Shift-D right off the bat, it's going to tell me Visual Studio Code that I don't have a task configured to do compilation. So I can click Configure Task Runner, and it'll ask me, what do you want to do? And so I say, well, I'm going to go ahead and choose a particular task runner, right? So I can choose tsconfig-based task runner if I want to, right? And if I do that, this will use tsc, right, to do this. I'm going to go ahead and delete that, and we'll do another one with Gulp. Let's do it again. I can do Control-Shift-B. I can configure the task runner. I can also do, by the way, I'll show you a couple of tricks with Visual Studio Code while I'm at it. I can actually show the, let's see if this works. Yeah, I can type Command-P and hit ankle bracket right, and this brings me up all the tasks that I can do from within Visual Studio Code. I can just sort of start typing the task that I want to do. In this case, I want to configure the task runner, and I can do it that way, right? So for example, I want to configure a Gulp task runner. a task.json file which says I'm going to use Gulp. Okay, for example, right? So I can do all that here, etc. Right? So these are kind of some of the things you can kind of do to get Visual Studio Code ready. You can, integrate tasks. You can say I want to use Gulp, and then I can add, for example, a Gulp file here, and I can add my tasks here. For example, here's my is shell command true, and so yeah. Yep, and that's gonna execute the Gulp test. Now, if I want to add a Gulp file, I simply add a new file, gulpfile.js, right? And here I can have my Gulp file, right? So I can do all of that. And so let's bring in some of that code that we saw before, right? Let's format that. Here we go. And so here I'm going to require Gulp, and I'm going to require this child process, right? So, so this is telling me right away I need Gulp, right? So I want to install a dependency in my project.json file for Gulp, and then I can use that to compile the project. So here I'm going to delete the dist folder, whatever's in there, and then go ahead and compile it, right? And here, what I can do, what I tend to like to do is create a new folder, src, to keep it distinct from the dist folder. I'm going to put my greeter in here, and what I can do also is have a hierarchical structure if I want to. So, and this comes in handy when I want to test things as well. So there's my greeter ts file, etc. Right? I can also refactor this a little bit and do some other things. But since we're running short on time, instead of continuing to show you all the stuff that I've done by hand, let's move on, and I'm going to show you a better way using Yeoman, right? So this is sort of the painful part of what you would have to go through manually in order to get Visual Studio Code ready for TypeScript, right? And you can automate all this through Yeoman. So let's talk about Yeoman. Right? And we're going to talk here. Let me talk a little bit about testing. I won't demo it right now, right away, but I will show you some demos. If you're going to do test-driven development, there's a framework called Jasmine. It has built-in asserts and mocks. You use functions like describe and it. So you want to install it. It's called Jasmine Core. You can install the typings for it, so you get Intellisense, and then you can manually set some things up, right? By downloading this zip file and unzipping it and getting the information out. And then you can write your Jasmine tests. And usually these are called spec files because it's behavior-driven development. And you can use them and you get a spec runner and you can run it as a browser and all of that. This is what a Jasmine test might look like. I'm going to test the suite, and I'm going to test a specific expectation in there, and I can use asserts. Right, and then I can run this in the browser. Right, so there's lots of stuff for that there, and I can include that script to be able to do that. But what makes this more powerful is I can then use Gulp in combination with Jasmine in order to serve tests in the browser. Right, so that when I change a file, it'll automatically detect it and synchronize the browser. Right. And you can read more about this in my blog post. Also, WIntelect, I think, will be offering a course on TypeScript. We can talk more about it in depth during that course as well. And these are the kinds of things you're going to be able to do, right? So, and then you can even write your test in TypeScript, which is pretty cool, right? And have it all work, right? So, and then you can run those. And what I'm going to do to show you a little bit more now about running, and then we're going to circle back and I'll show you one last demo that ties it all together. Okay? So you can write tests in Jasmine, then you're going to want to run these tests, and you can run them in the browser manually while you're developing it, but that's not going to work very well for continuous integration, where a build server, a non-human being, is going to run your tests. And for that, you're going to want to use a runner, and Karma is a very popular test runner. Right? You can run it from the terminal locally if you want to, which is convenient. You can also test multiple browsers, and it works great with continuous integration. Right? And so that's what I've got in here, some information on that. So you've got a configuration file called karmaconf.js. It's got all kinds of plugins. It's going to use a browser, what we call a headless browser, because there's no UI, because it's run from a terminal, basically. So it's called Phantom.js, and you can use that. And there's all kinds of things you can do to get it to support, modern JavaScript constructs that you're going to find in ES 2015, right? So you can install all these packages and get it going. So you can see there's a lot here involved in getting Visual Studio Code ready. When you talk about things like Gulp and Jasmine and Karma, it kind of all adds up, right? Right? And so I'm now going to plug a task into Gulp, which is going to use Karma to run my Jasmine tests, right? And before I do those tests, I'm going to want to compile it. And you can see here, I've defined my Gulp test so that the compile task, which I've defined earlier, is going to be run before this current task, which is going to run my tests using Karma. Okay? So, and I realize we're going fast here, but this is kind of an overview, right? And then finally, you can plug this into some sort of continuous integration system. One that I like is called Travis CI. Right, and you add a YAML file and you upload it, and it's got hooks that so that when you do a commit to GitHub, it runs a build. So after all this, you're probably breathing heavily and going, oh my goodness, how am I going to do all this? Well, to the rescue is Yeoman. Right, and what I've done is taken the liberty of encapsulating all this material that I've just been talking about for the last hour into a Yeoman generator that you can use. And so what I'm going to do now, probably spend another 10 minutes, 15 at the max doing that. I'll try 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions, and that'll bring us to a good 90 minutes for the entire webinar. So first, to use Yeoman, you install Yeoman using npm, right? And that's what this line does. Npm install yo globally. And then I can also install specific generators. And this is one that I created called generator Tony Sneed VS Code TypeScript. And you install it using npm. Once you've installed it, you can run the generator just by typing yo and the name of the generator. So you see here, it's the generator name, but without the generator dash at the beginning. Go ahead and run that. And it'll then scaffold everything out, right, for you. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to show you where you can find this, and I think I have this. Yeah, I have this here. If I just were to click Chrome, I'll show you where you can find it online. It's right here. And here's the generator I created. So if you're interested in creating your own generators, you can look at this sample code. But what's nice about this web page is that it gives you instructions for using the generator. So everything I talked about here, installing Yeoman, installing the generator, and then using it. Now when it comes down to using it, you're going to want to, first of all, create a directory where it belongs, cd into that directory, and then run the Yeoman generator here with this command, yo, and the name of the generator. Right, and then it'll go ahead and scaffold everything for you. So that's what I'm going to do right now. So I'm going to go back to my temp directory. I'll just do this all from the command line. Let me go ahead and close that one. You can just use a regular old command prompt. Doesn't matter. And I'm going to go ahead and make a directory this guy, and I think I'm going to call it my cool TypeScript project. Okay, I'm going to cd into that, right, like so, and I've already installed yo, installed the generator. I think I've installed the generator. We'll see. I'm going to go ahead and just type it away, and I called it Tony Sneed VS Code TypeScript. Right? Let's try that. Okay, and if I installed it, it should scaffold everything out. No, I didn't install it, so I have to install it. Let me go ahead and install it. So that's npm g, npm install g. Okay, let's try that. Npm, and it's called generator. I called it Tony Sneed dash TypeScript. Okay, so now it'll install that. I had it installed on my Mac, but not on my Windows machine. So this brings it down. And so once it's installed, we'll be able to then run it. So I'll kind of walk through that a little bit. So when you run it, you get a nice little interface, and they'll give you a prompt. And then you can also do this here. You can actually see what other parameters there are by typing --help. If you do that, you're going to see one of the options is to skip installation of NPM packages. And you might want to do that because it's kind of time consuming. It can be time consuming. Right? So, and you can choose to do that later, for example, right? If you don't want to take up so much time doing that. But this shouldn't take too much longer. And then once you do that, once you run the generator, it'll scaffold all the code out for you. You just open up that folder using Visual Studio Code. The tasks there are built in for compiling TypeScript into JavaScript, running tests, debugging the tests, etc. Okay, as well as debugging the code. So you get to see a pretty good example of the kind of things you're going to need to implement in order to use Visual Studio Code for real-world, heavy-duty TypeScript development. Okay? So that's the deal there. And it looks like it's probably, there it is. Okay, it's almost done. Yay. Okay, great. So now I'm going to go ahead and type yo, Tony Sneed VS Code TypeScript. Now I'm going to type --help to show you that there are some parameters that you can pass. And should come back. Yep, there it is. So one of the things I can do is I can specify skip install. And that's going to be a little faster, and I think I'm going to do that first because we can then see the code and then get into it. And in the background, I can install the packages from NPM that are required. So let's do that. So I'm going to say --skip install. So it won't install the NPM packages for the sake of speed. So I'll do that. I'm going to get a little bit of an interface within the terminal here. Prompting me for the application name. It's going to split up the name of the folder, right, into a nice application name, and I can just accept that or type a new one if I want to. I'll just accept the default. And it's all done. So now it's created a bunch of files. As you can see here, I can type code dot, and we're going to open up this folder in Visual Studio Code. Here we go. And let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. Yep. And you can see what my Yeoman generator does is give us everything we need, right? So now the thing that don't get it are the node packages, or the NPM packages. Now those are defined here in this file called package.json. Same one that was there when we typed NPM init, but this was created by the Yeoman generator. Now notice it includes some nice scripts. It includes all the dependencies that we need, and you can see there's a lot of them. Well, not too many, but enough. And all those dependencies are needed in order to do all the kinds of things we need to do, like compiling TypeScript, running these Gulp tests that we've defined. If I go to the Gulp file, you're going to see the list of the Gulp tasks. So here we have a help task, which is just going to list the tasks. I've got tasks for vetting the scripts, doing some linting, compiling TypeScript. I've got a watch task, which will watch for file changes and compile them into TypeScript when any of the TypeScript source files have changed. I can run tests. I can watch tests, serve the tests in a browser, okay, and use Karma. So a bunch of stuff there. So what I'm going to do right after that is I'm going to say npm install. And it's going to now go in the background and do that. Now, I don't have to do these as two separate tests. If I didn't specify the skip install, then the Yeoman generator would kick off the install process for me. Okay? I just kind of wanted to do that in the background, so we would save ourselves a little bit of time here. But this is just another way you can do it. Okay? And so we've got that. So while we're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and explore a little bit here of the other things. So I mentioned that there's this task.json. This is what it looks like when it's defined. I have two tasks defined here. One is the compile task. Gulp. Right? Notice that this this then looks at the Gulp file, finds a task named TypeScript compile, and runs it whenever I press Control-Shift-V. Right? It's going to show the output and run a problem matcher. And then I've also got one for running tests right from within Visual Studio Code. So if I go ahead and, because I have this file here, I can actually type Control-P, type the word task, hit the space bar, and wait patiently, and as if by magic, there I see my tasks, run and compile. Right? Not bad. Right? Now it's also going to tell me that it should also display in this list all the Gulp tasks that I've defined, all of them, not just the ones here. But it's not doing that yet because I haven't finished installing my NPM dependencies, one of which is Gulp, right? And all the plugins that it needs. So we'll go back here and check. Yep, it's coming along. And okay, so let me show you a couple other things. Notice that it's already created the node modules folder. That's where all the NPM dependencies go. Let's look at launch.json. I mentioned debugging. And debugging is kind of tricky to set up with TypeScript because you're going to need source maps, but all of that is set up here for us. If I go to the tsconfig file, it's in the source directory. So all my TypeScript code is going in this source folder, and that's where I place my tsconfig.json. There's what we saw on the slide, right? So here's my greeter class, right? Just like before. And here is my Jasmine test. So now I'm testing my greeter class, the greet method, to make sure it returns hello world, for example, right? So all of that is set up to do. I've also brought in typings, so I get TypeScript for Node, Jasmine, a few other things, right? I can do all of that. And if I go to my launch.json, and I go to my debug tab, right here, I see that I can debug with any of these tasks. So I can debug the current JavaScript file, the TypeScript file, and the tests. Right? I've got all that built in for you. Let's see how we're doing here. Hopefully that will finish soon. And I'll be able to show you some of this stuff here. Right? So what else do I want to show you here? So that's the basic idea there. Why don't I take some questions, maybe, while we're waiting, and maybe I can answer a couple of questions. Let's see if anybody has any questions. You can type those into the Q&A, and I'll be happy to answer those. All right? If anybody has any questions about what we've covered with Visual Studio Code and TypeScript. Yes. Or you can just ask. I think if you unmute the mic.
I've experienced normally takes a few moments for questions to appear.
Okay, that's Gavin. Yes. Okay, great. Sounds good. Notice that I've got support for linting here. One thing I mentioned while people are formulating their questions, it looks like we're almost there, is that you can install additional plugins, and you can in Visual Studio Code. One of the ones I mentioned is linting. So notice in my file I've got a tslint file. It needs to find all the rules for the conventions that I want to use, the naming conventions and the linting of my TypeScript code. I've also got a JS hint file right here, right, which defines all of that. And so that's used by my Gulp task, but I can also go and install extensions. And if I type extensions, I can show installed extensions. Let's see if I have any installed. Yeah, I've just got C#, and I can install an extension right here from within Visual Studio Code. So, for example, I want to install a TypeScript linting plugin. Right? There's certainly some of the popular ones. Let's see if I can just type TypeScript, and it looks like I think I saw a nice linting here. Here's a TypeScript plugin, and if I go back here, I can also see another one. Oh, it looks like we're almost done with the task here, so that'll rescue me. There we go. So let me try that again. And you'll see one of the ones that came up, I think, was nice. There it is, ESLint. Okay, so let me go install that one. This will be a nice extension for linting ECMAScript or JavaScript as I type it. Okay, so that's going to install and ask me to restart, Visual Studio Code in order for that to take effect. Okay, but I'm not going to do that for the sake of time. I just got 1 minute left. Now all the packages are installed, right? So once all the packages are installed, I can then run these tasks. If I type the word task again, Control P, task space, it should bring up some of these things. So first of all, I'm going to go ahead and compile my TypeScript. Now notice on the left-hand side, I have a source directory, but I don't have a dist directory just yet. It will be created because we're now running the Gulp task to compile TypeScript into JavaScript. Okay, and unless there's a problem here. Yeah, it looks like there's some dependency that's not right here, but that's okay. Let's go, let's figure out, let me show you one other little thing here. I can do some other things from within Visual Studio, or I can do them from the command line. So let's try from the command line. I'm going to type the word gulp. And if all is well, oh, it looks like I've got some dependency errors. Oh, yes, that's the problem, right? I see it right there. So it looks like this might be a Windows thing. Yeah, it looks like some packages did not install for us. So we won't be able to run the Gulp task like I had hoped. But if I were able to I could run it either from the terminal or from within Visual Studio, and I'd be able to see that, right? And this will compile the TypeScript code. I can run it. It would create a distribution directory, right? And I can have my tests be run as well. Okay, so all of that's there. But seeing as we are coming toward the end here, I'm going to go ahead and pause to take some questions. It looks like I've got one here. And it says here, this is from Todd. If you see Intellisense errors for fields not defined on standard objects, like HTML element, what is the best way to track down how to reconcile the NuGet package or using statement you need? So this is an interesting question. So what we're asking here is if I see, for example, let's say, for example, I need a package. I've actually, got something that I'm using here. Let's say, for example, in my Gulp file, I'm missing maybe one of these requires, right? That's going to tell me that I'm going to need a package, right? And so typically what I'll do is I'll get an error just in the output window, and then I'll be able to search on that and search for the package that defines that. So it's kind of a little bit backwards. It's not like it's a little bit different from Visual Studio proper, right? Where I may, where I'm using the full .NET framework, Here, everything is in packages, basically, NPM packages. And so they're not NuGet packages, they're Node packages, right? So, so it's not likely that I'm going to be typing along and going, oh, I'm missing a using statement, right? Now, so it's not like Visual Studio. In Visual Studio, if you have ReSharper, for example, in Visual Studio, you can do that. You can sort of reverse engineer it. It'll tell you, oh, you need to download this NuGet package. Whereas in this environment, you kind of go the other way. You start with the functionality that you need. You figure out where that lives, right? And then you install it. And you can do that from the command line, just like npm install, for example, like so. And then I can, instead of typing globally, I'll just type a local name. So for example, I want to install Gulp locally. I can do it this way, right? And right, and then that functionality will then be available to me. The other thing you want to do is install typings. So I mentioned back earlier there is a typings file, typings plugin that you can use to install typings. Now my code generator installs some of the common ones that we're using already, like Jasmine and some of the and Node, things like that. So you can do that as well, and you're going to use that tool called typings for that. So sort of a combination of NPM and typings, right? That'll let you know what you need to do, right? So yeah. So with the type goodness, then you can get some Intellisense here. So let's say if I type gulp. So you can see here I'm getting Intellisense, right? And I'm getting that Intellisense for Gulp because I've already installed the typings for Gulp, right? And I did that as part of the install for the Yeoman generator, or I would simply do it from the command line, right? So first you use npm to install typings globally. So I think npm install g typings, like so, right? And then you would use typings to install type definitions, and that would give you the Intellisense. Okay? So kind of, it's difficult to answer the question because you're really talking about apples and oranges between proper Visual Studio and npm, right, with Visual Studio Code. But that I think hopefully will at least be of some help, right? Right. So you install, so you realize, oh, I need some bit of functionality. I need to use Gulp, and I can't. So therefore, let me go ahead and install Gulp. There's nothing that's going to be going to automatically in the IDE tell you that you need to install Gulp, right? So you need to sort of approach it from the fact of what you need, right? So there's typings are installed. Now I can use typings. And let me see if I can figure that out. Here we go. So, and I can, for example, install the typings for Gulp. Let's do that. Or for Node. I'll do typings for Node. How about that? I'll say I want to do some Node Express development, right? So I can do that. I can do typings install Node, and I'm going to need a couple parameters. If I type save, that's going to save it in my a special file called a TSD right here. Looks like I've got Node already there. So let's say if I went ahead and let's go ahead and remove it, and let's go ahead and get rid of it from here. See, it's already lit up for me. And let me go ahead back to the command line and install it. And the other parameter I'm going to need is something called ambient. Okay. So once I install that under the typings folder, if it works, doesn't look like it's going to help me here. Yeah, it looks, oh, let me try something else. How about Gulp? The other thing is yeah, there we go. So Gulp works for me. So Node didn't work. I have to install a prerequisite, but Gulp worked. And so now I've got my Gulp, extension in here, right? And I have the Intellisense that I saw earlier. All right. Any other questions? It's about 22 after the hour.
Well, just while people are putting their questions in there, I just want to say thank you very much for your time, Anthony. It's, with the speed things change, new ways of doing things coming out, these short sessions, gracefully given you time to do, is definitely a bit of a saver for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a lot there's a lot involved, in doing full TypeScript development. So it's good to have these tools to help you to know how to use them together. I'd encourage you to go back to my blog as well, read those blog posts on getting Visual Studio Code ready for TypeScript development. I fully expand a lot of the concepts we talk about here. Check out the code here. I put up a slide here which shows you where to get the slides for this presentation. You can go to my GitHub repository, github.com Tony Sneed /WIntelect.vs Code TypeScript. You can get these slides, and then the demo code is available at this other repository, demo.vscode.typescript. Right? And then if you're interested in the Yeoman generator, it's located right there. All right.
And that Yeoman generator myself later.
Yes, happy enjoy it. It's a lot of fun putting it together, and it's not that hard to create your own Yeoman generator. So it saves you a lot of time for doing those kinds of things.
That was going to be my next question. How hard is it to build a Yeoman generator? Visual Studio Code for me is a good option, especially for my laptop, which is getting a bit old now. And then running the full Visual Studio can be a problem at times.
Exactly, yes. So Visual Studio Code is very, very lightweight, quick to install, and then using it together with Yeoman, you get what you like there. Kind of a little bit off topic, but if you were to use, I find that if you're doing any kind of web development with ASP.NET Core, you can use Visual Studio Code for that as well. And there is a Yeoman generator called ASP.NET. And that's all you have to do is install that generator ASP.NET, and it does the same thing. It prompts you, and it creates different kinds of projects for you, not just one, but it can create multiple. And not only will it create projects, but the other thing about Yeoman is you can use it to then create individual files. So let's say you want to create a new controller, a new Angular controller, or a new ASP.NET controller. You use a Yeoman generator to do that as well, right? Well, generators come in handy both for projects as well as for items within a project when you want to add new items. So one of my favorite technologies.
Very nice indeed. Very nice indeed.
Right. All right. I think we're just about toward the end here. I don't think I see any other questions. I'm going to back up a slide and show you my contact information again. So if anybody has any follow-up questions or would like to contact me for any reason, there's my email, tony.sneed@icloud.com. Again, there's my blog address, blog.tonysneed.com, and my social media, in particular the Twitter. Feel free to send me a tweet as well.
Okay, Anthony, thank you very much for your time. And again, thank you to our sponsors. And thank you everybody for coming, and hope to see you soon on our next event. Any information will appear on the LinkedIn group on LinkedIn itself, either that or either Twitter at LIDNUG. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming.
And thank you, Gavin.